I found that as a black woman, my existence for men who fetishize this complexion is merely to be taken, enjoyed, and explored.
Okay, so don't let my presence affect your answer, okay? Yeah. Okay, so would you date a black girl?
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
They got more energy.
Whoa!
Different.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, they're different.
Alright, love it.
What do you mean they have more energy?
Oh, okay.
Than whom?
Why is there lust more than love around black women's bodies in white people? It is coming from an origin, and that is slavery. During this dark period in history, black women's bodies were systematically objectified and commodified, primarily serving as objects of sexual gratification for their white masters. The exploitation and abuse they endured, particularly young black girls, remain tragically underrepresented and often erased from historical narratives. No one knows, actually, what was done to them, especially the young black girls. No one has ever told you what white masters did to them and why they only preferred them. Today we are going to talk about it. Let's get started.
The Black History Archives.
Young black girls' bodies were completely used as objects. White masters would never get tired of their bodies and would find new ways to torture them. Rape as punishment. Rape was used as a tool of punishment and control in the brutal system of American slavery. Enslaved women were subjected to sexual violence to break their will, assert dominance, and enforce compliance. Enslaved women were often singled out for punishment based on perceived disobedience, attempts to escape, or accusations of insolence. The woman would be isolated from the rest of the enslaved community, taken to a secluded area, a separate room, or even the master's quarters, to prevent interference and increase her vulnerability. The woman would be physically overpowered, often by more than one person. She might be held down, restrained, or beaten to prevent resistance. Restraints such as ropes or shackles were sometimes used to immobilize her, ensuring she could not escape or fight back. The actual act of rape was carried out with brutal force. The enslaved woman was sexually violated by her master, overseer, or other white men. Multiple perpetrators could be involved, compounding the violence and humiliation. Gang rapes, while less common, were a particularly severe form of sexual punishment. Physical violence. During rape, the rape was often accompanied by additional physical violence, including beating, slapping, or choking. This increased the level of brutality and reinforced the woman's helplessness. The use of objects for penetration to inflict more pain and injury was not uncommon. This added a level of torture to the sexual violence. Patsy, a character based on a real enslaved woman in Solomon Northup's memoir, was subjected to extreme violence. She was stripped, tied to a post, and beaten savagely with a whip by her master while others watched. This punishment targeted her back, buttocks, and breasts, causing severe physical and psychological trauma. Patsy's ordeal illustrates the brutality of sexualized beatings and the profound impact they had on the victims, both physically and emotionally. Public rape. In some cases, the rape was carried out publicly or in the presence of other slaves to serve as a warning and reinforce the master's authority. This public display was meant to instill fear and submission in the entire enslaved community. Public rapes were particularly humiliating, stripping the woman of her dignity and sending a clear message about the master's total control over the bodies of the enslaved. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. Use of restraints. Following their selection for punishment, women were often bound to posts, trees, or other structures to render them immobile during beatings. This method ensured they could not evade or defend themselves against the blows inflicted upon them. The restraints served a dual purpose. Not only did they physically immobilize the woman, heightening her vulnerability, but they also intensified her psychological anguish and sense of helplessness. Unable to flee or shield themselves, victims endured the full force of the punishment, often with onlookers witnessing their suffering. This deliberate use of restraint underscored the systematic dehumanization and control wielded by slaveholders, perpetuating a climate of fear and submission among the enslaved population. Excessive force and duration. Beatings inflicted upon enslaved individuals, particularly black women during slavery, were characterized by their excessive force and prolonged duration. These brutal acts were intended to maximize pain, leaving lasting physical and psychological scars. Tools such as whips, canes, and rods were wielded with relentless aggression, resulting in severe bruising, deep lacerations, and sometimes permanent physical impairment. The beatings were orchestrated to serve as a potent form of punishment and intimidation, enforcing strict obedience and compliance within the enslaved community. The visible marks left behind, bruises, welts, and open wounds, were deliberate reminders of the consequences of disobedience. This use of excessive force highlights the dehumanization and cruelty inherent in the institution of slavery, perpetuating a cycle of violence that defined daily life for those held in bondage. Use of sexual mutilation. In the horrifying context of slavery, overseers sometimes employed sexual mutilation as a method of punishing black women. This appalling practice involved deliberate and calculated acts such as cutting, slicing, or burning their genitalia, breasts, or other vulnerable body parts. The implementation of sexual mutilation was often carried out with brutal precision, using tools such as knives, hot irons, or other implements designed to cause maximum pain and permanent physical damage. These acts were not sporadic, but were part of a systematic effort to exert absolute control over enslaved women's bodies, reinforcing their status as objects of exploitation and subjugation. The psychological impact of sexual mutilation cannot be overstated. Beyond the excruciating physical pain inflicted, it left enduring scars, both visible and psychological, that haunted victims for the rest of their lives. This extreme form of punishment served to terrorize and intimidate the enslaved community, perpetuating a climate of fear and compliance under the oppressive regime of slavery. What's even crazier is the selection of these women for punishment. Overseers often targeted women who were seen as rebellious or who had defied their authority in any way. They would be selected for punishment to make an example of them. Women were sometimes chosen arbitrarily as a display of the overseer's power and control over the enslaved population. Audience impact. The audience, comprised of fellow enslaved people, was forced to watch the brutal act. This was intended to instill fear and remind them of their powerlessness and the consequences of resistance. Witnesses, especially family members and close friends, experienced deep psychological trauma, feeling helpless to intervene. Post-rape display. After the rape, the woman might be left exposed and vulnerable for a period, further extending her humiliation. The marks of violence, bruises, lacerations, and other injuries served as a visible reminder of the master's power and the brutality they could unleash. Forced breeding. Forced breeding was a systematic practice where enslaved women were compelled to have sexual relations to produce children, thereby increasing the slaveholders' wealth. This practice treated women as reproductive commodities rather than human beings. Enslaved women and men were selected for breeding based on physical attributes deemed desirable by the slaveholder, such as strength, health, and physical appearance. This selection process dehumanized individuals, reducing them to mere traits useful for producing valuable offspring. Selected women and men were forced to engage in sexual intercourse, often under direct orders and supervision. Refusal or resistance was met with severe punishment. The reproductive cycle of the women was closely monitored to ensure pregnancies occurred. If conception did not happen, the forced pairings would continue until the desired outcome was achieved. The women were treated like breeding stock, with little regard for their health or well-being. Once pregnant, the woman continued to work under the same harsh conditions, receiving minimal care. Pregnancy did not exempt her from labor or punishment. Childbirth was often a perilous time, with inadequate medical care leading to high mortality rates for both mothers and infants. Mary Gaffney, an enslaved woman, was subjected to forced breeding and later recounted her experiences. She described how she was repeatedly raped to produce children for her owner, who saw her primarily as a source of profit through her offspring. Breeding farms were specific plantations or sections of plantations dedicated to the forced reproduction of enslaved people. Enslaved women on these farms faced relentless cycles of rape and pregnancy, with the primary goal being the increase of the slaveholders' labor force and wealth. In his autobiography, Frederick Douglass mentions the practice of forced breeding. He explains how enslaved women were seen as valuable primarily for their ability to produce more slaves, and how the children of such unions were immediately incorporated into the labor force. But where is this information coming from if the white people tried to hide it? Some plantation records and punishment logs detail the use of sexualized beatings. These records often note the reasons for punishment and the instruments used, providing a grim account of the routine violence enslaved women faced. These records serve as historical evidence of the systemic brutality and the calculated nature of sexualized beatings as a tool of control. Do you think this is the reason why still black women's bodies are lusted and not loved? Is this the reason why white men still choose black girls? Let us know in the comments section. Is dating the same for black and white girls today? Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon. You can check out more videos on our channel too.